You're all very welcome to the second of the SODA Zooms. We're delighted to have two speakers today, in Owen Delaney and David Dixon. We were going to call this something, I forgot what we were going to call it, but information or knowledge from the experts, but we thought that one of the speakers mightn't like that title. So we're going to hear from their experiences of sailing Shannon 1 designs. David is well known to everybody. Some of the newer members will know Owen, keeps a close eye on us now on Loughree, but without making his head too big, I would think that Owen is probably our most successful Shannon 1 design sailor, having outdone his father by representing us twice at the Olympics. And certainly in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, he was a force to reckon with and impossible to beat. And if you did beat him, you got an awful glare as you passed him, and that you dared not do it again. So today, we've got these two people who are going to tell us really their experience of sailing 1 designs, different talks, and we're going to take questions at the end. So if you've got any questions, keep them to the end, and then we will we'll have the questions. So Owen, over to you, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Philip. Can you hear me? Or am I muted? Yeah, you can hear me. Well, it's lovely to talk to everybody. What I'm going to talk about two things, really. First of all, I'm going to talk about preparing for a regatta. And secondly, I'll talk rather briefly about race strategy. And the first thing I like to do before a regatta is select the best crew that I possibly can. And you also need to think about ideal crew weight. And you need a crew that will work in light weather, heavy weather, and across all wind strength. And my own personal view is that you need 3 fit people with a crew weight of about 28 to 30 stone divided between the 3 people. And the other thing that I think is important is probably not to have too much weight in the bow of the boat. I want to move on, having thought about the crew weight, to move on about the sheet hand skills, because the sheet hand is the driving force, the accelerator of the boat. And I'm sure that Dave will tell you how to set things up to get the best out of the sheeting and so on. Now, what I want to think about is the skill set that the sheet hand needed. And first of all, you actually need to have somebody who you get on really well with, a good friend or somebody that you can communicate with about all sorts of things, so that they will tell you when you're when they think things aren't right. And because to do well, the more information the helmsman has, the better they're able to make a good judgment about course and so on and so on. So sheeting skills are essential, and you need somebody that can concentrate 100% both on the wind and particularly off the wind. And sometimes you have a very hard beat and you take a rest and a breather and say, oh, thank goodness we can take it easy now. My experience is the more effort you put in off the wind, the better you will do. Another skill that the sheet hand will need is capacity to read a compass. And they need to read a compass because when you're steering, you often find you think you're on a header, and you need the crew to look at the compass and say, no, it's not a header, it's just the wind has gone a little bit lighter and your speed has probably gone down a bit, which often feels that like a header when it's actually not. The compass skills off the wind are also equally important, because at the end of the day, the shortest distance is a straight line. And if the crew can keep you on a straight line, all the better. The next thing the sheet hand will need is capacity to observe the wind, to see where gusts are coming down, whether there's a light patch coming, and just to be able to inform the helmsman, look, I think we've got a gust which might give us a lift, or I think we've got a slack patch, I think, and to be able to tell the helmsman what's going on all corners of the course. It's not just around where your boat is, but on other sides of the course and what is happening down there. The next thing the crew, both the sheet hand and the third hand, need to be able to do is to tell you what speed you're going compared to everybody else. Because if you find that you're not going as fast as everybody else, you actually need to do something. What can you change to get yourself up to the speed of the people around you? And especially look at the people that you're used to sailing beside. And if you're going faster than them, you've obviously got something right. If you're going slower, you actually need to change. And then another thing that the crew need to be able to do is to judge where boats are on all parts of, particularly when you're beating. You need the crew to be able to tell you that a boat that might be half a mile away on the other side of the beat is either ahead of you or behind you. Now, the best way to do that is you can take an imaginary line going 45 degrees to leeward of you and ahead. Any boat in front of that imaginary line will be ahead of you, and any boat behind that line will be behind you. Now, when you're doing that, you need to take into account whether you're on a lift or on a mean wind. And equally, if you look to weather 45 degrees to weather and behind you, any boat to weather of that imaginary line will be ahead, and any boat to leeward of that imaginary line will be behind. So as a helm, I want this information being fed in constantly all the time. And that even if you've got negative information, now it's no good telling somebody, oh, look, you're hopeless, you're doing really badly. That's not useful information. The useful information is where actually on a header, do we need to do something about it? Because that's information that you can act on rather than just negative information. And that I want to move on now to the third hand. Their brain powers might be better than anybody else in the boat. So use it and train them up in the communication and observation skills, because they'll have more time to look around at all corners of the course and tell you what's going on. And another thing that I think is particularly helpful for a third hand is to be able to judge when you're on the ley line for a windward mark. And the best way to tell a third hand to do it is project a line down the middle seat of the boat. If the windward mark is behind that projected line, you can lay the mark. If it's in front of that projected line, you need to go a bit further. And again, on the lake, you need to judge whether the wind is, when you're on a lift or a header, or what you think might happen. Now, you should be able to judge the windward mark a quarter of a mile away from the windward mark in a steady breeze. Right. The last thing that I want to say about boat preparation before I get on to race strategy. the best way to prepare your boat is to do 2-boat speed sailing with a good mate. And what I would suggest you do is go out maybe quarter of an hour early, or on a Saturday when there's nobody else around, get 2 boats sailing side by side where they're not interfering with each other. One boat should decide to adjust their settings until they get the maximum speed possible, while the other boat keeps everything the same. And when you've found settings that are working particularly well, you know that you're doing better. Then swap around and swap over and get the other person to adjust their settings till they are going at the same speed or better. And in this way, you can improve your speed. And it's the best way that I know. And I've just to tell you an anecdote, when I was sailing in Dragons with Robin Hennessy, when we started going to international regattas, we were paddy last by a country mile. But we made friends with some people from Sweden, and we did 2-boat training with them time and time again, sailing for 3 or 4 minutes side by side, and with one boat adjusting, the other boat keeping the same. And you will be amazed how quickly you can develop your speed and learn to get your settings in a better place. And David will hopefully give you some guidance on where you can go with all that. Right, I want to move on now to think about race strategy. My view is you must always have a plan. And so you know in your own mind what you think is probably going to be the best way to get around the course. And what you need to watch out for to begin with is you need to know the weather forecast. And when you're out sailing, you need to know, is the winds that you've got in line with the forecast? And if it's not in line with the forecast, do you think the wind might change to the directions of the forecast? Because that will then help you to develop a plan about which side of the course might possibly be the more favored. And now the weather forecast is a guide. And as you know, sailing on the lakes is fluctuating wind. And that's where I come back to having a good sheet hand, because on a beat, the wind is fluctuating and you might need to change the optimum setting. Off the wind is changing probably every minute or two, maybe even every 30 seconds. You need a sheet hand who will be able to adjust the sails, and the crew who can adjust all the settings to get the optimum speed out of the boat. And you will be surprised if you have somebody who doesn't concentrate, or the concentrate starts wandering, how you then maybe slip a few feet or half a boat length behind. Now, coming back to the race strategy, you need to think about where the race course is going to be. Where is the windward mark going to be? Thinking about Loch Ree, for example, might Beam Island interfere with the wind on the course? Because your race strategy has to take that into consideration. Now, also, if the windward mark is up near the shore, I know that when the wind is coming off the shore, it is probably going to back a bit, because the wind will be a bit lighter near the shore, and a clear, stronger, steadier wind further out. Now, if it's going to back near the shore, what tack do you need to approach the mark? Because if you're coming into the mark on starboard and the windward mark is near the shore, which might interfere with the wind, it means you don't need to have a half-mile beat on starboard tack, and you might need to develop your approach so that you're coming from further out in the lake towards the windward mark. So the land will always interfere hugely with the wind, and all your strategy has to take that into consideration, where you won't get caught out and run out of wind. So islands interfere. And the other thing that I need to mention, just in passing, is tide and current. So if you're sailing on the river, your strategy needs to be, well, do I dodge the tide? Do I go in the middle of the current? Do I have to short tack? How, and if I'm short tacking, will I run out of wind? Really important to take that into consideration as part of your race strategy. Right, having decided on your race strategy, if you think the best side of the course is going to be the port-hand side, your starting position needs to be on the start line, where you have some chance of getting out to that side of the course without giving away too much on the start line. So if there's a very strong bias to port end, and you want to get to the starboard end of the course, where should you start? Well, my advice would be to start probably 2/3 of the way down the line, so you know you can get to the favorite side of the course as quickly as possible. Now, my advice starting on the Shannon lakes is, if you're out on the main lakes, the start line is relatively unimportant. What is important is clear wind, boat speed, and getting to a position where you can tack when you want and make the most of all the shifting winds and changing conditions as they develop. Right, I want to come back to the crew and just say something about the crews. If you look at the people that do really well, they all have crews the same crew, that they're used to sailing together, they understand each other, the sheet hand knows what the helmsman wants, and the helmsman has absolute confidence in the crew to make absolute maximum out of changing conditions and all the variations that are taking place over a race. Right, I think that's probably enough for me, and I'll hand over to Philip or David. Thank you.
Owen, thank you very much indeed. There's a lot of food for thought there. Please keep your powder dry,
There's an awful
everybody.
lot.
I'm sure you've all got a lot of questions. So that's the race strategy, your crew, we all know now. Now, when we tune our boat, we've got another boat beside us, David is going to tell us how we adjust those bits of string to maximize our boat speed. David, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Just to add a little bit to what Owen said, I think the third hand is very much underrated in the boat. I think it's a very important position. In the 73, we like to think of the third hand as the long range tactician in the boat. And the better the person you have in the bow, the more tactics they can do on the long range. So they'll be watching what's happening over the far side of the course. They'll also be watching for the rogue starboard tack boat that might catch you out and things like that as well. The other thing that I picked up on is that when we're sailing near the shore, there's very often a wind bend, and the wind bend can very often do the same thing in, year out on that shore. So it's the same thing happens. And as well as that, the waves near the shore are very important. If you sail out into the middle of the lake, you get a big sea, and the Shannon does not like a big sea. You'll sail much faster if you're in flat water. So those are just my comments on, and adds to Owen, and Owen is absolutely dead right in what he says. It's all about teamwork. So I'm hoping everybody can see my screen. It's not come up on mine yet.
Can't see that yet, David.
No, it's not. Now you should be able to, I think, or it should be coming. Can you see my screen or not?
No.
That's not a good start.
You should be able to share if you click on the green share screen icon, and if you have the
yeah, I'm seeing that now. Let me just see. Let me try this one. Now are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, something's coming up.
Yes, I think you are.
Great.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is something quite a bit different, and I'm not sure this is exactly what Philip is expecting, but you're getting it anyway. What I'm going to do is sort of talk about the controls we have for the running lines in the boat and how we set them up. And by the running lines, I mean the kicking strap, downhaul, centerboard, and the outhaul. What I see in the boats very regularly is these controls are not set up particularly well. And if these controls are not set up well, it means you've got your head in the boat looking at the bottom of the boat. And if you're your head's in the bottom of the boat, not looking at what the sail is doing or what's happening around you, you're losing out big time. And I think Owen already sort of hinted at that. So you really have to have your boat in first class condition. So with that in mind, you need controls that are efficient. So this stuff may be very, very standard and very common, but I see that quite a few boats are not set up particularly well, and would work much better if they were simplified. So when you reach into the boat, you've got to very quickly be able to grab the right rope. So color coding can help. They must be easy to reach by either the crew or the helm. Now, on the 73, I will mainly do the kicking strap and the downhaul, but it does vary quite a lot as well. And it must be all the adjusting ropes must work. They must free off quickly and must react. So that's really important. And when you pull something, it must move. So you must have the right purchase on it. So if we look at what this is, a photograph of the inside of the 73, and we work a very simple principle that we have one lead back for everything. So the centerboard, downhaul.
David, have you moved on from the initial slide?
I'm a long way past the first slide. Okay, and that's what you're seeing, is it?
I'm personally seeing the cover, the first slide of the presentation.
Yeah, and I see now the top of the message I have. Your screen sharing is paused now.
Ah, okay.
So I'm not too sure why that is. Oh, it doesn't like the presentation mode.
It's okay. Even if you wanted to go from even that view, we're able to see.
Are you able to see that? Because the presentation mode doesn't seem to be picking up.
Yeah, that's fine. We're able to see that, and you can read the font as well.
Okay, well, I'll work from this from the overall theme.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, I'm getting messages here on my screen. Okay, well, we all know who's in the boat here, and we've already discussed this part of it. So I then went on and talked about just the kicking strap and downhaul, centerboard, and the outhaul, and rather nice photograph of a boat that's well trimmed. And then this is where I got to, and I was talking about the controls. So easy to find, color coded. You can see my color coding is not great, but I kind of sailing the same boat for the last 32 years, or will be 32 years this year. So I kind of know where things are on the boat, and hasn't changed very much. As I said, I like the controls into the center on top of the thwart, one line. It's very important to have the ropes, all the warps at the right length, so that they don't get tangled in the bottom of the boat. So when you free off and you pull in, there's not a thumb knot in it somewhere along the line, or a tangle, and that's really important. If you go for this type of system, if you put a pulley behind the jam cleat, when you pull it from here, everything tightens, and you can pull it from either side. So you can pull it from well either side, and it automatically jams. When you release, the only downside with that is it tends to release in one jump. The only other thing to here that's important is that the main sheet block needs to be on the front end of the thwart. If you put it back here, as you can see in this photograph, I originally had it at the back. When you reach in, you're reaching right across the main sheet, and everything gets tangled, and everything is just a mess. So if you put it forward, you don't get that option. You don't get that problem. So there's a lot of boats are running a double-sided. So they have jam cleats around here on both sides. It's whatever takes your fancy. Once it works in the boat for you, that's all that's important. And from my point of view, there's advantages and disadvantages on both sides. And I think it might be easier in some ways you don't end up with, if you're running with the one line, you don't end up with all the line on the one side of the boat, which you can do if you're running two lines. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the pulling power we have in the boats. All the controls you use in the boat should be using ball blocks. The ball blocks make a huge difference. So if you have any blocks in the boat where you need the power, need to be able to adjust, you need the ball blocks. It makes a big difference. I know they're expensive, but they'll make a big difference to the handling. There's really two types of systems we're using in the boat. One is the sort of the traditional system, which I call a traditional system here, which is a triple block, two triple blocks give you a 6-to-1. And it's just straightforward, straight pull. There's no problem on it. A lot of the boats now, and we're using it in elsewhere in the boat, is to cascade it. And this means that with less pulleys, we're getting more purchase power. So effectively here we have 4 pulleys and we're getting 8-to-1. Here we have 6 pulleys and we're getting 6-to-1. So that's really important when it comes to the way we operate the boats. Now, with the traditional system, your range of pull is much further than it is with the cascades. The cascades tend to close up quite quickly, and you don't get adjustment. And this can be important in certain areas of the boat. In the past, we used some levers and drum systems, but I'm not even going to consider those because those are all for history, and I don't think they've any place in the modern Shannon 1 design. So if we go on and talk a little bit now about these different points and where we are with them in the boat. I used to use a 4-to-1 kicker, and as I've got older, I found that I needed a little bit more help from the purchase. So I've now gone to 6-to-1. And I used a traditional type system on it, like you had with the triple blocks. Most boats are using a metal mast foot. I don't use a metal mast foot. My kicker does tighten when we go around the windward mark, but it's the first thing that's released when we go around the mark. It's part and parcel of going around the mark. Sometimes it's released just as we go around, sometimes it's released just after, but always before the boom is fully out. I think no matter which way you do it, your kicker has to be released anyway. So you have to have control over your kicker one way or the other. I'm adding the next little line in for those third hands with long hair. It's really, really important to have a short strop up near the boom. If you put your triple block up near the top here and you have a crew with long hair, you could get a lot of complaining, and it's not a very pleasant thing. It means a lot of screaming when the hair gets caught in it. I had it once, and I don't ever want to have it again in the boat. So I would always use a good strop like this. Take it right down to, you can take it down 0.5 meter without any problems, and it works well. I just put a little note in here that the kicking straps weren't originally part of the design of the Shannon 1 design. I think they were added in the 40s, but I think Vincent might correct me on that at some stage. But they were brought in to prevent Chinese jibes and to make the boats more controllable. Really, the only place we've got to be careful on is of where we have our attachments is the bottom end of the mast is clear enough, as close as you can to the base of the mast, either on the cup or as close as you can to the heel of the mast. But what's more important is where you have it tied on the boom. And if you have the tie-off point too far back, it means all you're doing is pushing pressure forwards and you're overbending the mast. If you have it too far forward, what you're doing is you're pulling down it's acting as a downhaul, and you can't release the downhaul. It just pulls everything down. Here you can see that everything is more or less in the right control because the kicker is on tight. There's a good bend in the boom, which means the boom is locking on the mast, which is absolutely perfect. And the angle looks pretty good here to me. What I would suggest is that it's important to spread the load along the boom as much as possible. So either use a webbing or to use sort of 2 takeoff points on the boom. I have a photograph of my own boat, my own boom a little bit later on, and you'll see the way I do it. I'm not going to say very much on the downhaul. The downhaul I normally use is a 4-to-1. Normally the downhaul won't release until the kicking strap is released, mainly because you've got that pull forwards. Now there will be exceptions to that, but as a result of that is if your kicker is tight, often it's not even necessary to cleat the downhaul because pulling it on will lock everything up anyway. So just pull it and it'll hold. Again, I'm not going to say too much about the centerboard. I'm using a 4-to-1 now on my centerboard. I have a knot on the very end of it so that if it does, and when it does, because it does get dropped occasionally out of your hand, fall out of your hand, and it'll fly down. And if there's not a knot to stop it, it'll just hit the back of the thwart and dig another hole out of it. So it's really important to have a stop at the end of the rope. Some boats are still using clam cleats right down near the floor in the boat, so you have to lean right in to get at the clam cleat, and it's just a mess. You must be able to get the board up and down quickly and easily. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the outhaul and how to set up an outhaul and where we are. Key points for me are you need either 6-to-1 or 8-to-1. I'm personally using 8-to-1, but I think 6-to-1 will work reasonably well as well. I don't think there's any need to go for 8-to-1. My opinion is that due to the fact that we're using a gooseneck fitting that moves up and down, the gaff jaws move up and down, I don't think it works to get the controls back into the boat. That means that we control from the boom, and it's going to be the third hand's job to do the control on it. And this is the way we work the 73. Third hand does the outhaul, and they get used to it very quickly. The other point here is that most of the booms need to be lengthened by between 150 and 250 millimeters. There isn't enough room to get the purchases on the existing booms after the outhaul, and you end up you can't get the adjustment you need on it. So you need to lengthen the booms. Before I go on and talk a little bit about the setup we're using in much more detail, the reason I started off talking about the kicking strap, the downhaul, and the centerboard was, if those controls are not working for you now, don't put on an adjustable outhaul, because there's no point. You'll just end up complicating the boat. You'll have another item in the boat that doesn't work. So my advice is, if your kicker and downhaul don't work, don't put on an outhaul. Fix what you have first of all. So the old system was really simple. So we just had a tie around the boom, and we just tied it out, and everything was fixed and lock solid, straightforward, absolute simplicity. Now we've moved on to a much more complicated system. Works really well, and it's very quick and easy to use. So we're using a cascaded system, where you can see the cascades pulleys are here, here, and here. And I'll show you some photographs a little bit time. But we also have a shock cord for easing the outhaul out, so that in light weather it'll release itself automatically. And we also have a take up for the tail end slack. And the tail end slack, the removal for the slack works really well, because it brings the tail end to tighten up right back towards the helmsman. So we would normally run a 2-to-1 reverse purchase on the tail end, and I'll show you that now in a minute. And the clam cleat itself is just forward of the kicker point, and I put it there so that if we jibe unexpectedly, the crew's head is not going to get walloped by a fitting. And it's our clam cleat is slightly under the boom on the starboard side, so it's not on the side of the boom, it's slightly below the side. So this is how it works for us in the boat. The cleat is here, you uncleat it and you let it out. Pulling it back in again is much easier in some ways, except it's counterintuitive. From here you pull backwards to pull it out. So when the crew step in the boat first time, it takes them a while to realize they're not pulling this direction, they're pulling this direction, because we pull the bottom rope here and everything tightens up. Okay, this was all sort of semi-automated when you looked at it on the presentation, but I'll just go through what we have here. Here we have the outer end. It's a 2-to-1 purchase. It's tied here, round and back out. So we've got 2-to-1 here. I use a trapped shackle, so we can't lose the pin, and the tie around the boom is through the pulley, so it's not on the sail, which means I can unclip the sail much quicker, and everything just stays with the boom, so it's much faster. It does mean though that there's a little bit of when we're sailing, the clew is just a little bit up off the boom, but it doesn't make any odds when you're sailing. So that's on the outer end. On the first pulley, of the class, on the cascade, this is the second. This is the second. This is giving you 4-to-1. We tie onto the fixing for the main sheet block. I make reference to that because we tried not to put extra holes and screws in the boom, because anywhere you have a hole or a screw in the boom, you risk weakening the boom. So we tie off on a fitting that's already there. So that gives us our 4-to-1. And then when we come back up here to this area, we have another 2-to-1, which is going to give us 8-to-1 ultimately. And you can see here there's an eyelet on the top of the boom, and the cleat is down here on the side. This is looking absolutely dead side on, and this is the bow. So what we don't do is when we want to release, we release here and we just let it run out. And I was saying to you about the kicking strap. I run two ropes down. It loops down from here and from here on the kicking strap, just to spread the load a little bit further along the boom. It's not ideal the way I have it set up, but it's better than a single point. And then up near the mast, it goes from the rope goes from the cleat around this pulley. So this is the top line here, comes round, back round this pulley here, and then back up. And the tail is taken away and it's kept up out of the way all the time. So we've no rope hanging down into the boat because they get tangled. And what we're doing when we want to tighten is we pull from here. We pull the bottom rope here, which means you can pull hard, tight, really quickly and easily. That's how we work the outhaul. Okay, and so that's the setup we have for the outhaul. I'm sure some of you may have a few questions, but we found this is working very well for us. You could work, I think what will work as well would be 6-to-1 with a 2-to-1 purchase out here and a 3-to-1 in this area. And I think this would work. I think this would work very well as well. Okay, so just to go on and talk a little bit about the settings and the way we set things up, I tried to make this as quick and simple as possible. When we're beating, we have the board full down, and it will be almost touching the thwart. Maybe not quite. A little bit depends, and you've got to get used to it, setting it up yourself. And as Owen said, you need to get out practicing with other boats and then decide where that sweet spot is. And that's really important. And we would normally have the board full down all the time, except when we get overpowered. Overpowered, we might lift the board a little bit, and we tend to lift the board a little bit when we're sailing in very heavy weather and with the reef. I think it's more important with the reef. I think you can drop it down almost the full way with the reef in if the wind is light, if you're not spilling wind. On the reach, you need a half board straight clear, no issue on that. Broad reaching, you can continually take it up until you get it almost the full way up, so that when you're on a dead downwind, you have little or no board. And what we find is that a little bit of board just aids the stability a little bit in the very heavy weather. But generally we don't. Generally we would have it almost fully up. What's worth noting is the position of the board at the top end is very critical. Thwart is a big movement down the bottom, so you change the center of effort, or center of lateral resistance, quite a lot by your position of the board, and it's really important when you're beating in particular as to where that is to get the balance on the helm. just talk a little bit about the downhaul. We use the downhaul just to try and pull the shape into the sail. Really what we're trying to do is to pull the fullness forward in the sail. And as you pull it forward, you tend to flatten the sail. We would be looking to try and have our max fullness about 30% aft the mast, maybe a little bit more than that, but in that sort of region. And that's generally a good bit further forward than you would have if you were sailing a boat that's using a head sail. And I just threw another comment in here that all these sail settings are very dependent on the spars you're using. And the spars are a bigger variable in the boat than probably the sails are. And if you've got very bendy spars, you'll end up flattening the sail too early, and you will end up maybe having to use too much downhaul to keep the fullness forward. Now, if we talk a little bit about the kicking strap, the primary use of the kicking strap is to take the twist out of the sail. So you pull it down, you take the twist out of the sail. We would try and have the top batten parallel with the line of the boat, somewhere in that region. Doesn't always work out that way because everything is so bendy in a Shannon 1 design, it gets hard to hold those sort of ideals in place. But when you pull on the kicking strap, you cause the lower end of the mast to bend, but it also bends the upper half too, to a certain extent as well, because you end up tightening the leech. So everything bends a little bit. So you end up pulling what you end up doing is moving the fullness back in the sail, because you bend the mast forward, and at this point here moves from here further forward, and it ends up flattening the sail and bringing the fullness back. So what naturally happens when the wind picks up in a Shannon 1 design is the twist increases on the mainsail, and the fullness increases and moves aft. So the sail becomes much more baggy, and this fullness moves aft. So what do we do to correct that? Well, we tighten the kicker to flatten the sail, and then we tighten the downhaul to move the fullness back forward again. So we end up with a much flatter sail. Maybe we end up with it flatter than we would like, but it's the only way to do it. The main sheet will also take out upwind, will do most of the work. So the main sheet is really taking the twist out of the sail upwind. And then what we do with the outhaul is quite simple. If we're sailing in flat water, we will generally have a flat sail. If we're sailing in as we go downwind, we will release the outhaul out. On a reach where we've got the wind running very fast across the sail, it won't be appreciably different than on the beat. Maybe a little bit fuller, but not a lot. When we go onto the run, we will try to create a bag more like a spinnaker shape. Now we won't go that far, but we will let it off quite a bit. We would generally flatten the sail as the wind picks up, and that helps reduce the heeling angle. But what's really important with the Shannon 1 design is not to over flatten the bottom third of the sail, because very often what's happening is the gaffs are overbending on top, and you're getting some weird shapes on top. And you need to develop your drive for the boat low down. And if you flatten the bottom half of your sail out completely, you get no drive low down, so you don't get any push forward. That's a very quick run through the adjustments and the sails and how to set the boats up and how to adjust. Really, the only way to do this properly is to get out on the water and to fiddle with your own boat and have a go at doing it. Now, I'm more than happy to help anybody who wants to help set up their boat or go out and practice with them. I'm going to have a little bit more time from April on, so I will be around more. So, thank you all very much for listening to me. And if there's any questions, I think we can take it. Now, I think what's really important here is the teamwork. And you can see it in all of these people, how the teamwork works. Some of it's on the shore, some of it's in the boat, but you can see how the concentration of the teamwork is working. Okay.
Thank you, David.
Back to you, Philip.
David, thank you very much. If you could just get rid of your share screen. Is that gone?
Perfect.
Should be.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Those were two very excellent talks. Thank you both for sharing all your knowledge and your skills with us. I think it really sort of epitomizes the class, that people are prepared to help each other. And thank you very much for your offer. We'll all be down, David. April, is it May the 1st? We'll all be down there looking for you, because what the class does is
just be careful.
So that we're all okay.
My plan is not to be around May, so.
Now, I'm sure there are questions out there. So if you could, if you have any questions, please put up your hand and just say who you'd like to address your question to. Do we see any hands going up, or do I jump in?
Mags has a hand.
Right, thank you.
David, what do you use to secure your outhaul at the end of the boom?
It's just 2 screws into the timber. I think if I share my screen with you again, we can take another quick look at it again.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So that's the setup, and I've made it. That might be a little bit easier to see now this time around.
It is, yes.
So I've got two screws in the end here. This boom has been lengthened. Before I had a fitting that went sort of around the end, and it had screws into the end grain. Didn't last. Just pulled out. Just pulls clean out. So there's quite a lot of load on this, but a lot of the load is taken on this strap here around the boom. That's doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
So you know, the outhaul should really only be pulling out.
We've still got a hole at the end of the, yep. We've still got a hole at the end of the boom. So
Margaret, you'll have to try that again. That didn't work.
A block
right.
Tied onto that. Yeah. We've still got a hole at the end of the boom. So we tie a block onto that, through that hole. But the timber keeps deteriorating, so the block moves.
Right. Yeah. It's really hard to know what to do here. I suppose we're all learning a little bit about how much, what size. Those screws are reasonably deep. They will be inch and a quarter screws going down into the boom.
Yep. Wow. Solid stuff.
You know, you'll pull if you use anything less than 3/4 there, you definitely pull them out. Yeah. There's quite a load on that.
When we got the outhaul on at first, the blocks we bought just deteriorated. Didn't realize what pressure we were going to put them on. They just collapsed virtually on the first day out, which was pretty amazing. I think we don't realize and appreciate quite what stress we put on those outholes.
Yeah. What's really important here, and I didn't mention it earlier, was the quality of the cord you're using is really important. You need very good non-stretch, because there's a lot of rope in this, and there's a lot to move, and it does make a big difference.
So David, just looking at the shock cords, that shock cord, I think, is it going from the end of the boom to the tail under the kicker? Is that where it goes?
This one here is going to the tail, and this one here is just pulling it forward. I'm considering putting the two together.
Yeah. Yes.
So I could, and I think it'll work just as well.
Yeah.
I see Jeff O'Donoghue has a hand up.
Thank you.
Jeff, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sorry, here, yes, thank you. Yeah, David, number one, and Owen, thank you so much for, I would say, fantastic honesty, and that's you know, an openness, and it's just brilliant. I'm just going to come back to Mags's point there on the outer end of the boom. I have supplied a number of them to people when I was in Shannon sailing, and I had done it on 2 boats myself first, and found that the problem of the length of the boom was most definitely that was an issue. So I did effectively what Mags is saying there. I tied the outer block through the hole that was there previously on the boom for the fixed out hull, let's say, with a very thin Dyneema rope. And so far I've found that it doesn't, it's not causing any problem from a wear point of view or anything else. The hole was already there, well varnished, etc. And a single block, David. So I didn't put a double purchase there. It doesn't make, the load is still the same on the anchoring of the outer one, no matter how many purchases you have. So I said, well, if that's the case, I would move the first gearing, if you like, the first the 2-to-1 onto the side on the first strap, about a foot forward of the out hull of the end of the boom, or maybe 2 feet forward, and then work forward from there as within a cascade, as you described perfectly. But just I felt that the room taken up by 2 blocks to have a double purchase or a 2-to-1 on the outer end was just taking up too much room on most booms that I came across.
I think Jeff, you're absolutely right, and that's why you lengthened the boom. Mine wasn't long enough, even with the hole. Mine wasn't long enough, so I needed to get it longer. And I think mine would have been too short, even with only 1 block on it. It was a big issue.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't discuss with governing body measurers as to whether I was allowed to lengthen the boom or not. So I tried to avoid that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other questions or comments?
Owen, could I just ask you, you have your race strategy at the start. You decided what you're going to do. Now, you have the luxury of always being in the lead, so you don't often have to change your strategy. But for the rest of us, with you powering ahead, or say, when do you change your strategy? Say you're lying 6th or 7th, coming round the 2nd. Do you change?
What you've got to ask the question is, am I going the right way? Have the people in front of me gone a different way and gained an advantage from it? And so it's constantly weighing up exactly what's happening, because you might find yourself, the strategy that you develop at the outset is completely wrong. And and that's why I was talking about judging boats that are in front of you or behind you. If you find that you've gone the wrong side of the course and the other side of the course has got a lot more wind, you need to cut your losses. And so you change your strategy as soon as you feel you're not doing as well as you expected. Now, I was very interested in listening to David, and he was talking about having all your lines change so you can move them very easily. That's why I would suggest that people go out. David's made it offers. He's offered to help people. Why doesn't somebody say, look, David, can I do 1-to-1 sailing beside you, and to see that I can improve my speed relative to yours? And I think, you see, one of the things David was saying is, look, conditions are changing all the time. you probably need to ask yourself, have I got the ideal settings for this particular wind strength? And if it's a longish race, you might find that it might be force 2 at the beginning, but you end up with a force 3 or force 4, by which time you definitely need to change your settings. And the only way, in my view, that you can know the right settings for different conditions is going out and doing speed training against a partner in all sorts of conditions. Now, one of the things David didn't say that I have done, not in necessarily in Shannon's, but it would apply in Shannon's, I put a marker pen mark on the ropes where and you have one mark for force 2 and another mark for force 4. So it's a sort of an outline and starting point to know whether you've got the right settings for particular conditions. Because conditions are changing constantly and you need to keep up with that. But the other side of it is that if you don't know what your settings are, you think about them too much and not look at what's going on all around you. And that's why you need 3 people. And you see, ideally, if you had the third hand who is looking at all of these things and could feed that information back into the sheet hand and the helm, you've got a huge advantage. David said teamwork, absolutely. And with all the best success that I've ever had, always had a great team. And if you've got somebody you're fighting with, well, you might as well stay at home.
Do we have more questions?
I would wholeheartedly agree.
Do we have anybody else? Because you won't have another opportunity to get these 2 guys to speak so openly. So let's, or else perhaps it's Saturday and you want to watch God knows what, Tommy Chin. Any questions?
The rugby,
No other
rugby's
questions?
not on till next week.
I know, yeah. I'm just surprised. Perhaps they knew it all. I'm delighted if they did. Nobody else.
We're trying
I
to
know it's the way Owen explained it, but it's so easy.
Hang on, I think Una has a comment or a question.
No, I just said we're trying to process it all as opposed to ask questions.
Well, if there's no more questions, I personally really enjoyed that, and I think we're extremely lucky to have people who are, as I said before, who are prepared to share their knowledge with us so that we can all benefit from their successes. And I look forward now to seeing at the beginning of the season people pairing up and going out together. And clearly we must take on that information and really team up with somebody who's got similar boat speeds, similar positions in the races where, and we'll all improve. Could I once again thank Owen and David for an excellent evening. Thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to seeing you. We have a Zoom coming up in a couple of weeks' time when we're just going to finalize the rule change and put that to bed, we hope. And then we look forward to everybody who's been able to get a ticket for the dinner. They're now on the black market going for horrendous prices. We look forward to seeing you at the dinner, and have a good evening. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.